Good afternoon. It is February 26th, just after 12:15. We're here for the state legislative update and session. I will turn it over to Ms. Wanger and the Office of Intergovernmental Relations, and you can walk us through the bills that we're going to be taking up. Okay. Some bills we're going to just get an update on, and some bills we plan to take votes if council members are ready to do that. But with that, let me turn it over to you to explain and walk us through how this is going to go, and then we can get into the packet.
Good afternoon. Thanks for having us again. So just quickly, the package, we're going to talk a little bit about the federal policy priorities that will be submitted. That's the first thing, and then we're going to go through some legislation. On a lot of the bills are open to discussion about taking a position on, but all the transportation bills that are at the back of the package, those are all there for informational purposes because it is a major issue this session and we don't know how it's going to set up yet. So this is just a list identifying kind of what's out there that may be acted upon or possibly not. And then there's one other environmental bill. There's two environmental bills on the package, of which one is just for informational purposes and it's marked as such. So the session, we're halfway through. So we're on the, I guess I would call it the downhill slide, but that's the busiest part of the downhill slide. But we're pretty pleased about that. So the end is in sight, but there's a tremendous amount of work to be done still with the legislature. They have started having pretty robust voting sessions, but the bill hearings now are like very heavily subscribed, and so there's a lot of activity going on there. So the first item that we're going to go through is the federal policy priorities. It's just a draft list. This is something that the county puts together and sends to the federal delegation, to the congressional delegation every year so that they know what's important to the county. And then this is also not only sent, it's posted on the website, and I think it's becomes kind of an official guideline for the county's interest at the federal level. And I'm going to ask Sarah Morningstar to walk through that, if you're good with that, Mr. President.
Hi, Sarah Morningstar, Intergovernmental Relations. Nice to see you all. You have a 5-page list of 8 broad subject areas of federal issues that the county would like to convey to our congressional delegation in a letter. I don't think there's anything, it goes transportation, environment, high-speed internet, affordable housing and human services, biotech and life sciences, economy, nutrition programs, and the Farm Bill, a reauthorization of the FAA, and then some issues on higher education. I assume you all have looked at this. Happy to discuss any particular issues if you have any. But other than that, this is what would be conveyed to our congressional delegation for their consideration.
Any questions or comments on that? It's a reiterating of our longstanding priorities in many respects and consensus between the executive and the council. If there are any comments or questions, let us know. Could you, there's really 2 pieces of this. I just wanted to note, one is the federal priorities, the other is the earmark,
Yes.
county support earmarks. Could you just walk through the timing and cadence and process for how that is going to be approached?
Absolutely, Mr. President. So these are the policy priorities that the county has. They're generally broad in nature. The only thing that I would just add that's kind of different from last year is the Affordable Connectivity Program that the counties generally, nationally, have been involved in with regard to funding. With the next part, there is the earmarking process or congressionally directed spending in the Senate or community project funding in the House, 2 different names, for FY25. We are working with our executive departments to come up with lists of project proposals with a requested amount of money that we would be looking for from our congressional delegation in FY25. As we all know just from reading the newspaper, FY24 is not yet done by Congress. In that bill, it was the same process where a bunch of projects were submitted by the county government, but also eligible nonprofits and municipalities are going after the same amount of money. The county, if Congress passes what it's supposed to do, could get a little more than $30 million in earmark funds in FY24. And again, this would be everything from nonprofits to municipalities to park and planning to county government push projects. The first deadline is March the 8th for FY25 submissions. That's our senators have a March 8th deadline, and Congressman Trone has a March 8th deadline. Congressman Raskin and Congressman Ivey don't have their deadlines posted yet. The House and Senate Appropriations Committees have not yet come up with guidelines for FY25, so everybody's sort of banking on what we were told for FY24, though that could change. The projects go in on their deadlines. The members review each project, go back and forth on questions that they may have. The members then submit, the House members have, again, the number's uncertain, but between 10 and 15 projects that each House member can submit to the congressional delegation, to the Appropriations Committee in the House. The Senate has an unlimited number of proposals that they can submit to the Senate Appropriations Committee. And the process will go through probably, I'm assuming through the summer, although with the various conventions, the timeline could be changed.
Any questions on that process or timing? Okay, well, thank you for that. Obviously, we appreciate our federal partners. We hope that they can bring home some support and look forward to continuing the efforts that they have undertaken to support our community, and we will be kept in touch, in close communication. The office will keep us in touch, and we'll weigh in at the appropriate time to make sure that we meet the deadlines.
Okay. Thank you so much.
Appreciate it. Okay.
Okay, so now we'll go ahead and walk through some state legislation, and we'll identify some of these things. If you'd like to take a position on them, gladly take that. But a couple of them, at least one piece is informational, and then again, when we get to the transportation side, that's all informational. So we'll kick it off with one of MACO's 4 priorities having to do with education, transparency, and I'll turn it over to Kathleen to talk about it.
So, good morning. As Mel said, this is a MACO initiative, and the intent of the bill is to allow for more oversight and accountability of school spending, oversight and transparency of receipt and expenditure of state, federal, local funds, how those funds are used, how they're budgeted. It's consistent with the county's own priority about an increase in oversight and accountability regarding federal, state, and local funds. Essie McGuire is here, Ms. McGuire is here as well, so she's your expert, and the bill relates very much to the county council's authority and role. So fortunately, she's here to help answer any questions you have. The bill, as you know, the school system is required to prepare a budget that allocates funding in what's called major categories. And state law lists those major categories of funding, and it has some subcategories in those major categories, and the budget that's provided to you has to break down funding in each of those major categories and then the subcategories under them. The bill adds 3 new major categories. It adds current funds held in reserve, the amount of federal funds received in the last year, and the amount of funds held in trust or otherwise dedicated toward long-term obligations for retiree health costs and other post-employment benefits. And then it specifies a little bit more about what they mean by funds held in reserve or federal funds received last year, and some more detailed reporting on those categories. But it adds those 3 major categories. And that's the budget. So that would be the budget as it comes to you and the information that's in the budget. And then the bill relates to expenditures. And the way I read current law, after you've appropriated funding, the school system have only a certain amount of discretion in terms of whether they deviate from using the funds exactly as you told them within major budget categories. And so the school system has discretion to transfer within major budget categories, has discretion to transfer funds within those major categories if they report to the county council within 15 days after the end of each month about the transfers they've made within the category. Then under current law, if it's a transfer between a major category, it requires council approval. Current law does not specifically state advance approval. The bill modifies that part of state law that relates to transfers between major categories to say that when it's a transfer that's more than 1% of the total funding in that major category, there has to be advance approval by, in our case, the county council, of that transfer from one major category to another. Then it creates an exception to that general rule that says actually the school system can actually skip that advance approval requirement when there's a certain expedited process that's allowed when the timing and achieving approval of the county council would result in the loss of an opportunity. That's the language in the bill. And then the bill requires the State Board of Education to adopt uniform reporting requirements such that around the state, the way information is put in major categories, the information that has to be included, the details, that there's uniformity throughout the state. And then the bill requires that the State Board post certain things on its website. Its budget, the reports it provides to council, the annual financial audit that it's posted on its website. So that's what the bill does. I can tell you we just spoke to the county executive about it a few minutes ago, and I know that he wants us to, although he certainly wants to support this bill because it is a MACO initiative and it does relate to our own priorities. His concern is it does not get to the level of granularity that must be reported to the council, or even further to the types of changes in how they use funding that should be approved by council. So I'm working with OMB to try to come up with some language regarding that. Again, it would be very diplomatic because we definitely support MACO, definitely support anything that'll help other counties as well, but working on some language there. And actually, I've got a meeting this afternoon to talk with OMB staff, and if Ms. McGuire is available, we'd love to have her help. But
Well, absolutely. Well, first of all, obviously, the overarching issue here is a major priority for this body, one of our key priorities. It's one of the 4 main priorities for the Maryland Association of Counties. So I appreciate that. Having said that, I wholeheartedly, strongly agree with the county executive that we would like to go further than this bill goes in terms of the type of budget accountability and transparency that residents expect, and I think would be anticipated for organizations like ours that are providing multi-billion dollars of taxpayer funding to any institution, much less something as important as public schools. So I appreciate that. You will wait to make motions to the end. There are a number of colleagues in the queue. I did, Ms. McGuire, if you wanted to just come up, my one question for you in lay terms, in light of, does this go as far as we would have expected based on the conversations and the public discussion of the levels of transparency and accountability that we have called for, that residents have urged and demanded? In layman's terms, what does this really change in terms of our ability? Because some of these things are already happening, right? The requiring that things be public and posted on the website already happen. Some of the things already happen, and so that's one question: is what does this actually change in layman's terms? And the second, could you put in context the 1% piece, because personnel is the biggest major category essentially, and that's, as far as I can tell, about over 80% of the over $3 billion budget. So moving 1% is a lot of money. So what would it take to get to the 1% trigger within the personnel category, for instance, at a high level?
Sure. So thank you. So a couple of things. One, as you pointed out, and as OIR has pointed out, the sort of good news, if you will, for Montgomery County is that much of the information that is identified in this bill, we actually already do receive or have access to with the school system. So certainly, as you said, also, I think we would collectively support this initiative statewide and on behalf of other counties. But from a substantive standpoint, much of that information, nearly all of that information, is already available to us through regular reports. Some of that information comes to us, to the council, from specific requests that the council has made over time. For example, information on the benefit expenditures and the health of the pension and benefit funds. Those are, that information comes to the council twice a year based on an action that the council took a number of years ago to request that information. So there are some pieces that the council has, again, over time, excuse me, expanded its information gathering and routines. So again, certainly support the intent of the bill to increase that information availability statewide. The category piece, I think, as you pointed out, Mr. Friedson, is essentially something that the council could, already under current law, be more strict about the practices that we have related to the categorical transfers. I will say that, particularly in a system this large, defining when the board is transferring between categories is a little complicated. For example, is it when they encumber a contract? Is it when those expenditures are made? Is it when they project that there's going to be a deficit at the end of the year versus the actual deficit? Because all of those are different points in time for an organization of this magnitude. And so, in some degree, the practice that we have employed of analyzing that on a month-to-month basis provides the same level of information without inhibiting some of those operations. However, also, as has been said, that's at a very macro level. The instructional salaries category, Category 3, is over $1 billion. In and of itself, it's a third of the budget. The additional, the next largest instructional category is special education, again, a significant amount of funding. All of which is a long way of saying that I think if the 1% itself does not necessarily change the nature of the relationship that the council could have to those transfers, because it would not necessarily be triggered in some of the largest cases.
Appreciate that. Okay, so I agree with the county executive. We should support this bill. It reinforces at a high level something that we're interested in, but in terms of the granularity and what impact it will actually have, I think it needs to go much further, and I think we should continue to advocate for that. Let me turn it over to the chair of the Education and Culture Committee, Councilmember Jawanda.
Thank you. Excuse me. Thank you, Mr. President. So just for colleagues' edification, I've been talking to MACO and speaking to the bill sponsors and also the board. They have not taken a position on this bill yet, but I think I agree in general we should support it. I've also asked, and I think I was talking to Ms. McGuire about this as well, that we should just have before us so we should have a sense of the categorical transfers that are happening. One thing I think we want to avoid is, and just having been on the E&C committee for the last, going on 6 years, it would get very cumbersome to have to deal with categorical transfers, even within category, depending on what this percentage goes up. This trigger of 1% probably wouldn't change much, as Ms. McGuire mentioned, but I think it's something we want to be aware of as we're trying to deal with this. And just the amount of information or lack thereof that we would have to give any real substantive input on the change, I think is something that just because of the size and structure of the system, how quickly the superintendent and her at this point or their staff needs to move. So we just want to think about that. And obviously the E&C committee would have to approve these transfers. We currently do that after the fact in many cases now, and the full council usually does it on the consent calendar. But if it got more in depth, it could take up a serious amount of time, and I'd be concerned about we wouldn't have the information in real time. We'd almost have to have the school system in front of us all the time to answer, like, what's this for, where's this go? So just practically. So I just think that's something we want to think about. Mr. Guerra, do you have anything to add to that?
I only would comment that, again, the committee does review the monthly financial reports periodically. For example, the committee will be taking that up on
Yep,
Thursday.
yep.
And so again, there is, in addition to staff's review of the reports, the committee does take them up in full. But as you said, in sort of a transactional, by the moment operation, that is where we just would have to put some clarity around the definitions of what was going to be addressed.
Yeah, and we'll also be looking at the benefit fund info this week too. So just wanted to provide that, but I do think in general, we should be in favor of this, and I'm really interested. I'm trying to talk to the county executive as well, as I think we all should, about what that specificity means. You know, I'm all for more authority, but it has to be something that we can actually realize that would make a difference. And so I just think we'll need to work with all together to get to that point. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Glass.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you to staff for leading off with this item, because it is extremely important, and I think it is one of the most important pieces of legislation that's going to come out of Annapolis. And it's in the weeds, but that's because it occupies nearly half the budget here in Montgomery County, and occupies more space in other jurisdictions. So we're all watching this, and this is something I explicitly called for last year when we were going through an extremely tough budget, and we were not getting the detailed answers that we were requesting regarding whether or not the county could provide the largest single increase in MCPS budget in recent memory. We wanted to know where it was going. We wanted to know where the current funds were going. And the problem was that, and remains, that there are essentially 14 categories in which $3.2 billion is put into. And so I appreciate the perspective of the Education and Culture Committee talking about the transfers, and the council president talking about the transfers. But one way we could eliminate the concern about the transfers is simply by having more categories. So we have 14 categories. The legislation adds 3 categories, which are basically funding sources. It's not really the, as I see it, the nuts and bolts of where the money is going, but it's where the money is coming from. I would like to go further, as has been noted. We need more than the 14 categories. We need more than the 3 that are being proposed. And I know that a lot of folks within the school systems around the state and the associations that they work with are concerned about micromanagement. But let me be very clear, this is not about the councils and the county government's micromanaging of our school system's budget. This is about shining a light on the budget so everyone understands where our money is going. And as we continue to step up and help advance the blueprint and are asked for more investments for our teachers and our educators and our students, we need more tools so that we can do more. And I support this. It does not go far enough, and I hope you can convey that to our colleagues in Annapolis. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Lukey.
Thank you, Mr. President. And to Councilmember Glass's point, he referenced 14 categories. Those are actually 14 subcategories between major category number 2. Is that right? Or are they each considered? So right now, with the bill as drafted, it adds several major categories. If you look at
The second page of the second.
3, 4, and 5 are the new language in the bill, right? Category number 2, current expense fund requested appropriations, has 14 subcategories, of which instructional salaries is one part of that.
That's how I read it. That is current law.
Right.
Councilmember.
And so the issue, and that everyone has talked about so far, is that specifically subcategory 3 under category 2 is the one where we have the most challenges.
Yes, I'm sorry, I just would clarify that those 14 categories are the existing ones. You're right that they are a subcategory of the expenditure
Right.
appropriations.
Right.
But they're not, I don't believe those are proposed to change.
They're not proposed to
Okay,
change. That's
thank
the
you.
problem, right? So they are little subcategories within the giant big major category number 2, right? And number 2, with its 14 subparts, they can move money currently, and even if this bill passes, between and among all those things, they cannot?
No, those are the categories that the council must ultimately approve the transfers between.
Yes, but we don't get to do that till after the fact under our current.
That is our practice.
Situation.
We can.
Right.
The council could do that and has the authority under the law to do that.
Right, but I think that knowing the goals of the blueprint, and knowing the desire to make sure our salaries are increased and we're treating our education professionals appropriately and looking at the big, bold landscape, our guidance counselors, our psychological personnel. So that subcategory 3 of instructional salaries dealing with just those who directly deal with students, teaching students, teachers, aides, psychological personnel, guidance counselors, and library personnel. That is a huge chunk of change in every county's budget. And so, our number is higher than Kent County's because Kent County's is small, but that number for Kent County is still significant to Kent County. And that's the thing that should be, in theory, and the benefits attendant thereto for that personnel, that is fenced in its own major category, so that there's less flexibility there and it requires a bigger step, because we still have situations with schools that don't have full-time teachers, right, who are limping along with long-term substitutes left and right. And we want to make sure we're doing our best to keep the money where it needs to go to fund our teachers, to retain our teachers, to support our teachers, and the other instructional staff who work with the students day in and day out in the school building. And this bill doesn't get us there. And that was one of the big things, that it didn't matter which size county you were talking about at Mako, everybody had issues with, because they're trying to meet the blueprint's goals, and they're also realizing that in the county councils and county bodies that fund the school systems, they have no real true way to manage that particular piece of the budget in an effective way. The other piece with the standardized reporting manual that's requested, there is an existing financial reporting manual for Maryland Public Schools. Granted, it hasn't been updated for 10 years. I don't know the origins of the existing document or why it's there, but it talks about accounting, coding by statutory requirements, and different fields that each local school system is supposed to already be following. So I don't know if they talked about any further what this bill would do that makes it different from the existing financial reporting manual, or whether it's just amending that and making it current, and whether the bill sponsors would be amenable to putting in a review period, or like language that talks about the need for that to be updated periodically, so that we don't have something that might in fact have needed housekeeping over the past 10 years and hasn't been touched.
I can tell you, Councilmember Lutke, I did do a quick review of that. I wanted to see if it could tell me more about how this current law is implemented. I didn't see much that helped me. It just keeps referring to the major categories in state law.
Right.
But are you suggesting that obviously that would need to be updated if a bill passes? Are you thinking updated in a different way, or?
No, it's just that sometimes in statutes that I know have been added to the educational article in more recent years, they add language that specifies that it be reviewed periodically. And so, things like this, which might have stayed stagnant for a bit of time, and if, by doing that kind of housekeeping on your guidance documents or your reporting manuals or whatever, you're also keeping on top of needs of your jurisdiction. So I think that adding language like that would be useful. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, Councilmember Rink.
Thanks. Agreeing with everyone who's noting that the level of granularity is lacking here for us. And we want to ideally be able to pass something here that's going to allow us to do something really meaningful, but regardless, more for the state is better. We should support it. And keep thinking about what more we could do over time. I just also wanted to add on that obviously one of the things that we as a council have been interested in is making sure the Board of Education is able to do the level of oversight and due diligence that we want them to be able to do. And so that means ideally the Board of Education being able to have a full-time job just focused on their work there, with attendance salaries, as well as looking at their staffing. And I am aware that it doesn't look like we're going to have a bill to that effect coming through the state this time, but wanted to flag it anyway as we look at some of this legislation. And thinking about their staffing as well. They have an analyst there now, which is great, and I understand has been hugely helpful for them. The more granular detail we are requesting, and we're hoping to be able to request, we're going to want the Board of Ed to be able to be taking as good a look at all of that as we are able to look at. And so that is likely going to mean that they need more analyst hours over there as well. So I just want to make sure that that's something that all of us are aware of as we look at that budget as well.
Thank you. Just clarify, 'cause there's three aspects that have been discussed here and in previous conversations. One is whether this is a full-time or part-time job and what is expected of that. Two, what is the salary, regardless of whether it's full-time or part-time? Is it an appropriate, compensation, and does that allow us to recruit the candidates that we want, or does it allow the people who are in those roles to provide the level of focus and dedication that we would expect of a $3 billion enterprise that is as important as a public school system? The third piece, as was discussed, was the question about staffing and looking at oversight. Just to clarify, the first two require state law. The third one requires nothing besides the Board of Education prioritizing differently. Can I just get confirmation on that?
That's correct. The board would absolutely have authority to determine the size of its own staff within the allocations that the council provides.
Appreciate that. I'll just note, and there's always things to look into, but 5 years ago, one of the focuses that I had was helping to strengthen our oversight role. And so the previous council that has continued under this council and the former Government Operations and Fiscal Policy Committee made a concerted effort to strengthen the Office of the Inspector General, to add positions to that department, to really make oversight a core priority, because there was a real recognition that we were not doing what was expected of us. The school system could do that tomorrow if they wanted to. Now, the other aspects of it that require state law changes that there is some support for, looks like it's not going to happen this session. It may be looked into in further sessions. That's a much longer and more challenging conversation. They're not mutually exclusive necessarily, so I don't want to insinuate that, but I think it's important that we separate out the things that require state law changes and the things that really don't. That could be done immediately should there be an interest. A fiscal analyst was a step in that direction, but a baby step, frankly, in that direction, given the size, scope, and magnitude of the school systems. I just wanted to address that. I appreciate Councilmember Mink, you raising those issues, and Councilmember Glass and others elevating these issues publicly as well. Okay, I want to quote several colleagues, I think, and paraphrase the county executive. It sounds like we support with amendments, and the amendments are to strengthen the granularity of this. I think we need to work out exactly what the position says. That would be a unanimous position between the executive and the council. So I think we can, if there's support, we can say support with amendments, but then we will want to work out, among staff between the executive and the council, exactly how we, specify what the specificity would be and exactly what we are asking for in the bill. Is that the consensus? Mm-hmm. All right.
Thank you.
Without objection, I think we'll do support with amendments, and we will move on to hopefully our less robust discussions on other bills.
Well, possibly not.
Possibly
this next
not.
One.
This one's a thorny one too.
Yeah, it is a bit of a thorny one. It's something that was presented in a timely manner in the fall with the local delegation package. Needed work. Didn't look like work was forthcoming, so we kind of assumed it was not going to advance this session. But work did end up occurring to this bill, and it's back before you with, and I'm going to let Leslie talk about what's going on with this piece of legislation now.
Sure. So House Bill 1300, this bill would void a restriction on use that prohibits the use of real property for housing units that are otherwise authorized under Montgomery County law. And so any restriction that's in a deed, a declaration, or the bylaws or rules of a condominium or homeowners association would be included under the bill. However, the bill would apply to any limitation recorded before June 1st, 1958, and then prospectively from October 1, 2024. So anything that has been recorded since June 1, 1958 until present day would not be voided by the bill. There are a couple of points that I wanted to bring to your attention, that being the definition of housing units under the bill. It isn't entirely clear what is meant by use of real property for housing units. That could possibly mean Airbnb or ADUs, unclear. And then, like I said, the issue of pre-1958 and then prospectively when the bill is enacted.
Okay, let me turn it over to Councilmember Stewart.
Great. Thank you, Leslie, for that update. I will say that the Delegate Moon has reached out, and I think probably to a number of us, to say that they are working on this bill and would like our input on these, the 2 points that Leslie raised regarding if we have input now or moving forward, if we don't in the session today, but that they are working on this and want to hear our opinions. So just wanted to report on that.
If I could just add just a couple pieces of information here too. The county executive, this was discussed with him this morning, and he opposes the bill in its current form. Also, the delegation, the House delegation has voted in support of the piece of legislation, but it sounds like, based on that conversation that took place Friday morning, that this piece of legislation will receive a thorough review in the standing committee that's chaired by Chairman Corman. So.
I'll just add what Mel said, that we're grateful that there's a planning representative here. They also had comments on the bill. Lisa Giovanni is here. We just wanted you to know, and we appreciate her being here, should there be any questions that would go to their expertise on this.
Could I just get a point of clarification? So 1958. So, I mean, with my history is right, 1958 was the kind of predecessor in New York of the Fair Housing Act, which was in 1968. Is there a specific reason why 58 was selected for the covenants? Could you just explain that?
To my understanding from the bill sponsor, that's when Montgomery County commenced their comprehensive planning. And so to his mind, anything prior to that might be suspect in terms of its intention that was recorded in these deeds or bylaws. And then so if it has been covered in our modern era of planning, it seems in his mind.
Got it. So it'd be modern planning in Montgomery County, which, in subdivisions, et cetera, and ultimately the general plan, which came out of that regional effort in the 60s. Okay, well, that explains. I was thinking it was a fair housing related dynamic, but apparently it's related to something else. Okay, we have a recommendation from staff. I'll just note to hold the bill. We have a recommendation from the county executive that he opposes the bill outright in its current form. Let me turn it over to Councilmember Glass.
Appreciate Councilmember Stewart for sharing the thoughts of Delegate Moon, who conveyed them to me, and I know others too. So I'll share my thoughts, and that is I very much appreciate the intention of the sponsors, because they clearly understand that we're in a housing crisis and we need to have more housing, and that there is a percentage of land in Montgomery County. I'm not going to venture to guess if it's a quarter, maybe it's a third of the county land that is zoned for housing that is within HOAs. And so how do we equitably build more housing in Montgomery County? And I appreciate the legislation for sparking this discussion. I know they're working through various aspects of it. It's hard for us right now to to work through that process, especially when the E&T committee is going to do that. But I just wanted to say I appreciate the effort because we need to have more conversations about our very limited housing supply and our very limited land as well. And so everyone should be contributing to a solution, and that's what this legislation is intended to do.
Okay, thank you. Councilmember Balcom.
Thank you, and I agree with Councilman Glass. We need to, we need to do what we can to have more housing coming from District 2. Probably 80-90% of the housing is under HOA. So I just have a brief question about why this bill is only applied to Montgomery County, and why is it coming here versus a local bill? Any thoughts on that?
So this was a bill that was in the local bill package introduced by Delegate Moon and others, and so I think that when we brought you the local package, this bill was in that package, but it was not in this format. And why not a statewide bill? Lots of times pieces of legislation end up focusing locally, in an effort to actually get them to move in at least one place. So it's not uncommon that something like this could start out as a local bill, and it's something that our state delegation lots of times does go ahead and do it just as a local bill to see what happens. I mean, should this bill get a lot of traction, and again, we don't know what's going to happen in the Environment and Transportation Committee, but I suppose it would be possible that, other counties would sign on, or it could even be amended to be a statewide bill.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Mink.
Thanks. Also appreciating the intent of this bill. My understanding from my office has been talking to Delegate Moon as well, and really appreciate his and others' outreach on this one, and appreciating that they are continuing to work on tweaks and clarifications and so on. My understanding is that it's part of the larger effort by Montgomery Planning to their effort to review and document the history of housing discrimination and segregation in Montgomery County, and so. So I suppose that is related, as Council President Friedson was noted, to that 1958 date, but per the comments of my colleagues around the need for housing, that would, I still have some questions about why we're making 1958 a cutoff date, and what properties and how many properties would be impacted with the cutoff date versus without a cutoff date, and what the bill sponsors' thinking is on whether or not then to maintain or remove that cutoff date. So I would just be interested in if it's possible to get some numbers and some idea of the geography of where impacted properties would be. That would be really helpful. Certainly, I absolutely appreciate the effort to make sure that we are building the housing that we are, that we intend to build, as well as to undo the systemic racism that led to a lot of these covenants. But do we have an answer? Go for it. Yay. Yes.
For the record, Lisa Gavoni with Montgomery Planning. So our historic preservation staff did a really deep dive on their mapping segregation project that looks at restrictive covenants. It was a really small area. It was kind of just Tacoma Park, and it was a huge undertaking. So the ability for us to take a next step, and we are working on the same research for the Mid-County area of the county, would probably not be feasible in the time of this session, but we are working on looking at other areas of the county that have covenants too.
Great, thank you. So from your work so far on that initial portion of the plan, do you have a feel for, with a cutoff date of 1958, like what we're looking at in terms of properties impacted prior to that date versus after?
I don't have that answer, but I did talk to our historic preservation staff this morning, and there were also concerns about the 1958 cutoff date. Single-family covenants have likely been written in continuously, and there's no reason to think that they stopped in 1958. And anecdotally, they said they're probably widespread too.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I'll just note that the planning department's work, and we talked about this significantly in committee, focus a lot on inside the Beltway. Most of the HOAs that are detached single-family homes and townhomes are actually outside the Beltway. Most of the common ownership communities inside the Beltway are multifamily already, so that is not really the target, so to speak, and the focus of the legislation. So there are, while I think you can hear some broad support for what the delegates are trying to do here, there are some outstanding questions of what implications it actually would have, whether or not it's moving the needle in the way that we would want it. So it seems to suggest that the council staff hold is heading in the direction where I think most colleagues are generally supportive of the concept, but a lot of outstanding questions on the details, and probably not even in a position yet to put forward specific amendments because there's just a number of outstanding questions. So, I think that seems to be where things are headed, but let me turn it over to Councilmember Lukey.
Thank you, Mr. President. Yeah, on the partial retroactivity of the bill, it seems to me that should this pass during the spring session in its current form with the time parameters that are currently written into the bill, then anyone who dislikes what this bill does has the opportunity to amend their bylaws and their condominium association agreements between the end of session and September 30th, 2024. And so just from a logistical standpoint, I've tried to wrap my head around how if that's the intended purpose, or why you would say, then I'm going to notify you because then there's a thing that we've done, but we're going to carve out this exception, and then they're going to have to come back another year to fully execute whatever it was they tried to do, et cetera. So I know I too have been in contact with Delegate Moon about this, but I just wanted to put that out there. I just feel like the gap is, to a policymaker who's trying to do a thing, potentially a very dangerous thing, because it gives those who oppose the policy goals of the bill ample time to adjust.
Interesting point. Thanks for that. Councilmember Jawanda.
Thank you. Yeah, I appreciate that point. I think if we decide it's good policy, we like it, we want to make sure it would apply to the intended folks that it should apply to. So agree with that. I think we should hold for now, but get the information. I agree with the intent of the bill. And to the extent that we need to allow for different housing types across the county, which we need to do, which this council's worked really hard on, we want to not have restrictions in the way. And so, but I do think getting more clarity on the dates and the definition and how broadly it's written would be important. So, thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Katz.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. I too agree that we should hold the bill. To change the homeowners association bylaws, really, an act of Congress is easier, I think, because it takes so much to do it. In some cases, it's 75% of the ownership. I mean, it's a high threshold. So I believe if we're going to be doing this, then it has to be in a vehicle like this. However, we are giving up county authority by having the state do it this way, because they're overriding air zoning.
Well, just to clarify on that, we actually don't have authority over homeowner association covenants. So one of the challenges that we do have at the local level is an HOA housing covenant is really contract law. They're putting a covenant on a property that's in agreement. And so, for instance, accessory dwelling units, as an example, does not apply to a homeowners association because they're voluntarily agreeing among parties outside of county zoning to restrict further than they otherwise would restrict. So it would be overriding, no doubt, the homeowners association, the common ownership communities, and the harder than act of Congress changes that you mentioned. But just to clarify, it wouldn't be taking away our specific zoning authority. They'd still be subject to county zoning, from my read of the bill.
It would be, except for going forward, that we would not be allowed to say what the zoning would be as far as not having single-family zoning. I'm in favor of the intent here, but I do think it would take away some of the authority for zoning in the county.
Yeah, I don't want to get into an argument, but the bill. I just want to clarify, because I think it's important to clarify. The bill would ensure, is intending, the goal of the bill, the intent of the bill, is to nullify the local housing authorities' restrictions that are different from the broader county zoning in that area. So that the county's zoning, if we say this type of housing is allowed in this particular area, that a home ownership association couldn't say you can't allow that type of area in our, within our homeowners association boundaries.
Except it then begs to differ if it's privately owned property. The homeowners association could say, we don't want that. If it's they could say that they don't want whatever it is type of housing there. It's privately owned. If you had a piece of privately owned property today that said you could have high-rise buildings on it, but the homeowner, or the property owner, said, all I want is a single-family home, they would be allowed to do that.
Yeah, okay, well, we have to look into the difference between a homeowners association, which is a governing board, and an individual property owner. And the question here that is raised, obviously any individual property owner makes their own property choices. The question is whether a governing body, a homeowners association, has the authority to prevent an individual property owner who happens to be a member of that homeowners association who wants to do something with their property that's otherwise prohibited under the governing document of the homeowners association. So it is a material prohibition on a homeowners association as a governing body to restrict certain types of housing in certain circumstances, and that's really what the bill does. But I think this speaks to, there are a lot of questions here that need to be fleshed out and worked through. I think hold is the appropriate dynamic. We've heard a lot of questions. I know many colleagues are speaking to Delegate Moon and others on this in particular, and I would encourage everybody to continue to do that. So without objection, we'll do this as a hold per council staff recommendation. Let's move on to HB 864.
Right, this is two environmental bills. This first bill you're welcome to take a position on if you'd like. The second bill is just for informational purposes. Garrett? And also I want to mention too, we have Mike Sheppel here from the Ag office, just in case there's questions about solar things.
So HB 864, this one is pretty straightforward. This is really a building decarbonization bill, and the council took a position on a bill like this last year. This is a bill that would reform the Empower Maryland program, which is the big statewide building energy savings program. All the utilities and Department of Housing and Community Development offer incentives to building owners to make their buildings more efficient. This bill will recenter that program around greenhouse gas reductions from a climate standpoint, sets more ambitious targets, says the utilities have to offer incentives for things like high-efficiency electric heat pumps, which there's been some hesitance to doing within that program, imposes some requirements on the way DHCD serves low to moderate income households, tries to reduce the long-term cost to ratepayers of that program by not letting the utilities rack up debt anymore and making utilities pay off the debt. Last year, the version of this that council supported also included an end to incentives for gas combustion equipment. There were two different competing versions of the bill. They tried to reconcile those. They ran out of time. Neither one of them passed. So this bill represents the consensus that emerged at the end of last session. My recommendation would be to support this bill, perhaps encourage them to try to bring the gas incentives piece back in, but probably support this bill either way.
Okay, we've supported a similar bill in the past. Without objection, we'll support this bill as well. We are going to do a hard cutoff before a committee session, so if you want to just quickly mention 1407, but as noted, this is for information only. Any follow-up questions, we don't intend to have a full-fledged discussion and take a position today, given time constraints.
Sure. So very quickly, HB 1407, this is a bill to try to accelerate the development of solar across the state, but the way that it does that in two ways, both of which have significant implications for counties. One is that it prohibits counties from restricting solar development and other forms of renewable energy. The way it does that is a little bit vague. There's probably going to be questions around that. The other is that it assigns responsibility to the Maryland Public Service Commission to establish solar development targets for each county in the state. Unclear exactly how they will do that, but these will be big solar targets to make up for the very significant gap in solar development across the state, and effectively then imposes upon the counties, you have to find a way to create that amount of solar development during the next 10 years. Would require a lot of private property to be able to do that would probably require us to be able to significantly financially incentivize that amount of solar to make that happen. Could be conflicts with what we've tried to do in the past around the ag reserve. So a number of questions around this one.
Appreciate it. Number of questions on this one. It puts a lot of responsibility on the county without any funding to carry out those responsibilities, or really an understanding of how the enforcement would occur. There's some preemption dynamics, but there's also an overarching solar component here in reaching our environmental sustainability goals. So I appreciate the update. I'll just note, as you heard from Ms. Wenger earlier, there are a number of transportation-related and other bills that the team is monitoring closely that are here for understanding and for any follow-up and questions in between meetings. With that, I actually see a colleague for the last word, Councilmember Lukey, and then we're going to wrap up.
Super fast, just quickly. This bill does not have a retroactivity provision in it, so it would not undo the ag reserve's current zoning, correct?
I don't think we've asked that specific question to our legal counsel on this one.
As I read the bill, it's simply preemption. It gives, just as currently, if there's a project under 2 megawatts, we have control, but above 2 megawatts, the Public Service Commission can preempt. It doesn't say our zoning law is invalid, it just says they can preempt it. So,
well, it says the county may not adopt zoning laws that restrict or prohibit the construction. So long as we are not in the future doing that, but it does not have a retroactivity provision in it.
I can tell you the intent was to preempt existing as well.
Gotcha.
Yeah. My understanding is the prospective is broad zoning, and the preemption is specific site,
to the
site by
project
site
use. Gotcha.
Siting of, two different site works,
Gotcha.
but siting of solar facilities.
Okay, thank you.
Appreciate that. Okay, appreciate that. Thank you for the discussion. Keep us posted as we move forward. There's a lot of follow-up here that's required, and we know that the legislative session is heating up in earnest as we close in on Sunny Die and Day 90. So with that, we are adjourned.